That works. All right. Cool. All right. Where's the clicker? Awesome. All right. For those who are here for the first time, we are Trajectory Labs, which is the next slide coming up as soon as my clicker starts working. Ta-da. Oh, wait, nope, that didn't work at all. Success. All right. Welcome to Trajectory Labs. We are a nonprofit interested in doing what we can to make sure AI goes well for humanity. We do this by running an events and co-working space to help facilitate researchers working on the most pressing problems in AI safety. And welcome. We're very happy to see everyone here today. If you need to use the washrooms, just outside the glass doors there, use the key code on the pin pad when you want to come back in. Also, quick note, David's presentation today, we're going to have the main presentation, then there will be a lengthy discussion period afterwards. So you are allowed to ask questions, but we do ask, if it's during the presentation, please keep your questions brief. If it takes you more than 2 sentences to ask your question, that's probably best saved for the end of the discussion. So yeah, that's all we have for now. Without further ado, big round of applause for David.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Fine? Okay. Okay, first show of hands. Who's heard or thought or read in some way about biological risks related to AI and AI safety? Okay, about most of us. That's great. So this is mostly going to be like introductory. There's too much to get into to go super deep on one thing. If there's like things people are particularly interested in, we can talk about them after as well. So yeah, that's the goal of this. Questions, Mario already told you about questions. So sort of the agenda for today, I'm going to basically present the simple case, why we might worry about AI and biorisk, why we might worry less, what we're going to do about it, what more we can do, which of those things we should do, some closing thoughts, and after I finish, we can have like open questions where everyone's here. At some point, it's usually better after we switch to just breaking out and talking amongst ourselves. Okay. So here's the basic idea. So why might we worry about AI and biorisk in general? Well, there are two sort of situations we would be worried about. Primarily today, we're going to be talking about bad actor misuse of AI systems and how AI progress might make that worse or more worrying. So this has sort of two parts to it. One is that it's hard to make a bioweapon, and it could be easier with future AI progress, which would mean that it's more likely that any individual person is going to do it, or any group. And then the pathogen that they do create could be worse because of AI. So these are like two broad ways we might care about AI having an impact. Now, you've also probably seen biology as part of like a misalignment worry. For example, if someone asks, how might a misaligned AI cause harm? Someone might respond with, it might make a virus. This is not what we're going to cover today, because this is like, I consider to be more in the domain of AI misalignment and AI safety in general. So today we're focused like basically purely on how might AI models assist people intentionally developing bioweapons and not as some accidental, unintentional risk of using them. So historically, what we've seen is that if you think of how powerful a caveman would have been to inflict harm on other people, it would be pretty low. So like the worst case, like 10,000 years ago, you could have done to someone, you could like fire an arrow maybe, or throw a rock at someone, or punch someone. And this is like fairly limited, right? There's just only so much one person back then could have done. With technology now, even pre-AI, this number has just gone up. So obviously there was no plane hijackings a long time ago. There was no bombings. So now we have, useful inventions like gunpowder and powered flight and whatever. But this also comes with the fact that the maximum harm that any individual person or small group can do is limited. So what used to take maybe an army to do is now possible with one bad person or a small group of people having a terror plot or something like that. Again, in principle, why biology though? Like this is just only one of many ways that harm might come about and what bad people might do. But there are a few things that make biology specifically sort of like a worrying area that you might worry about bad people doing stuff to, more so than, let's say, bombings and shootings and whatever. One reason is that in every field, there's a sort of offense and defense balance. So some things sort of lean in the direction of being easier to defend from than to make attacks for. And biology doesn't seem like this. For example, it's much easier for one virus to take over or spread very widely. And it's much more difficult to do the things that we do against viruses, like immunize people and have restrictions during pandemics and stuff like that. Even if we could, there's so much that gets in the way of doing exactly what we want to do. So it's actually quite hard to make a vaccine. Many people don't want the vaccines. Many people don't want to stay home in a pandemic. And there are legitimate reasons why people might not want to do any sort of thing in response to biological threats. So even though there are many mitigations in response to biological threats that come about, there are also many limitations on our mitigations, and this seems to be basically stacked against us. So throughout human history, pathogens have been like a big deal, and much of the death that has always occurred has been from pathogens, and much of the death that occurs today is still from pathogens. So it's clearly a relevant historical factor. Another thing that makes the modern world sort of tough biologically is that we were not evolved to live in the current situations we do. Now, overall, this has been good. For example, urbanization and people living more closely together has agglomeration effects that are economically useful, and much of the last sort of many thousands of years, or few thousands of years, getting richer has been due to people living close together. Now, what's the problem with people living close together? They transmit more disease. We also fly planes, we have ships, we have places where people can spread their viruses in ways that they couldn't before. And so we did not evolve immune systems that were, in environments similar to what we have now. And so these sort of mass pandemics were mostly a feature of post-industrialization society, and most of the worst ones you've heard of were things that came about during very recent recorded history. Why? Because you can actually spread them. If you lived in a small tribe of 100 people or something, there's a limit to how much one virus can kill. We also interact with animals quite a bit, and they're a reservoir for things. And then why worry about biology in general? Again, pathogens we've had, some of them have been pretty bad, and people might have a sense that they could only be as bad as they've been, but there's like no reason this has to be true. Sometimes there's like a weak anti-correlation between how dangerous something is to catch and how transmissible it is. But this doesn't have to be. So there's no reason in principle you couldn't have a very dangerous virus that also spreads quickly. Some features that make this happen, for example, remember COVID transmitted pre-symptomatically, and so it's not enough to just isolate people, and even though it did cause harm to people later on, that didn't stop it from spreading plenty. Okay, so why should you take it from me? I didn't intro myself, by the way. I'm just sometimes we have experts here, I'm just like a guy. But here are people who are more than that. So various governmental organizations worry about this, so various branches of the US administration and others do research into this. They publish papers and policy about this. Popular think tanks, for example, Nuclear Threat Initiative, sort of well-respected bipartisan think tank, worries about this sort of thing. David Baker and George Church are very famous and well-respected people in the protein design space, and they themselves say that, yeah, this is a worry. Rand and CSIS is in the Center for Strategic and International Studies, not our Canadian CIA. They publish white papers all the time and talk about these risks as well. And then the model developers themselves, you think, well, these guys would hate for everyone to be thinking about the risks of their models, but they themselves worry. So Anthropic, in their responsible scaling policy, says that risks can come from deliberate misuse of models. They acknowledge it very plainly. OpenAI keeps track of a bunch of capabilities as part of their preparedness framework, and biological and chemical capabilities are ones they keep track of. I didn't get a quote from the other biggest lab, which is Google DeepMind, but they have the same sort of opinion on it. The leaders of all of these labs do too as well. So Sam Altman of OpenAI, Dario of Anthropic, and Demis Hassabis of Google DeepMind have all at one point or another explicitly acknowledged biorisk or something adjacent to it. And these are the people developing the models themselves. So if anyone doesn't want that to be the case, it would be them. And yet they're honest about it. Wow. Okay. So, this is what I tried to say earlier. It was missing from the previous slide. Okay. So yeah, we care about both misalignment and deliberate misuse in the general sort of AI safety discourse, but today we're just talking about deliberate misuse. There are a bunch of AI models which might be relevant to biology. first, we have general purpose LLMs, which are generally scientifically knowledgeable, and people use them for all sorts of work. And so this includes things which might be biology related. We'll get later to how powerful they are exactly in these domains, and there's a lot of uncertainty still there, but they're only getting better. And so even if they weren't too useful right now, their usefulness is probably going to be higher in the future. Then there are also biology-specific models. So these are models which are not general purpose. They don't have, sort of general world knowledge or understanding, but they're trained for specific biological tasks. So this might be turning the sequence, an amino acid sequence of a protein into a structure or something like this. There are design tools that assist with designing specific, like custom de novo biomolecules. So they might predict the properties of something you've ideated, or they might ideate molecules themselves. There are sequence models which are trained largely like large language models, but instead are trained on sequences of proteins and nucleotides. And so they have some internal representation of your genetic code or protein sequences and stuff like that. Both of these have their own sort of misuse worries, and a lot of the things we say about some apply to the other, because this is a very broad overview, but of course they are different, and we'd probably want like different tools to address their potential harms. Okay. There's also, of course, objections to these worries. And I wouldn't want to make this so one-sided as to say, well, just panic. So what we do have now, which we weren't sure about a few years ago, was that we have models which at least the developers of them would say are PhD level in question answering. Some of them genuinely are on some benchmarks. And what's notable is that we haven't really had any notable misuse cases even with the existing models. So if you've played with the latest models, I mean, they're pretty capable. And in 2022, you could have said, look, if we have this level of capability, it's bad news. And yet, we're all here, right? These models have been kicking around. People send, trillions of tokens through them every week. And basically none of those tokens turned out to be anything that has caused some pandemic, at least that we've heard about. There's also a lot to developing a bioweapon that's not just question and answering. So if you think of what a scientist does, like a biologist working in a wet lab, they do physical things as well, right? They think, they read, they talk to other scientists, of course, and that's the part that current AI models might help with. But they also do physical things. I mean, like they work in a physical lab, they have to wear equipment, they have a lot of expensive physical tools, they need to learn how to use them. You could not just get up today and start working at a virology lab in a university or a pharmaceutical company or anything like that. You also need to buy the stuff. So if we're imagining someone who wants to do something bad, well, they also have to physically have the materials, right? So there's a limit to what you can do with the tools from your kitchen or whatever. With biological things specifically, there's like a lot of subject-specific machinery you use. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of people you can cook various drugs in your kitchen or whatever, but this is not the case for designing a virus or something like that. See here, this is from Shawshank Redemption. Red is known as the guy who knows how to get things. And so you need a guy who knows how to get things if you want to do anything bad. And so this naturally limits what exact harms can come about, even from someone who's really assisted by a smart model. And then also, you need a confluence of a specific type of person and circumstances for this to even be a likely thing. So none of you guys, I'm sure, or I hope, are interested in developing bioweapons. And there's only so many people, and only so many people with the capabilities and desire. Now, part of the risk case is that that group of people with the capabilities will grow if the models are found to be significantly human augmenting. But as we'll see, this is like probably true. That said, it's still not. It's not like there are millions of people who are just itching to build a bioweapon, and there are various incentives and things that make it that even people who want to do really bad things might not pick bioweapons as the tool they use. Partly because you would also infected with the weapon and stuff like that. So it has limited utility. That said, many people in the past have tried to develop bioweapons. We'll talk about that later. Okay, and so despite AI progressing, it has not progressed enough to remove the need for any of these things. And so even if you imagine, let's say, the next generation of models coming soon, it doesn't seem like there's some current line that is making them vastly better at the things that would be required to operate a lab. Now, there are things that are quite close to that they're getting better at. But it's not like something that I expect to just change in the next few months. Often when people make AI predictions about what a model can't do, they're invalidated within a quarter or two. But this doesn't seem to be the case here. Now, you'll see that they actually do have some knowledge of wet lab stuff, but the fact that they're constrained to sort of the textual, digital world is a big limiter. And at the end of the day, they would still need someone to be operating and actually doing physical things. And that is what, obviously, we haven't seen much progress in robotics and stuff like that. Okay, and then also, you might have been much more worried about this if you thought no one would ever do anything about it. But luckily, the model developers of the most powerful models do take this very seriously, as we saw. So that's a reason to believe that they are legitimate risks, but also that they're not going completely unmitigated. And so most of we'll see later, there are safeguards that try to prevent you from using GPT-5 or whatever to do something bad like this. So once people start taking things seriously, it's actually a good sign that, okay, the thing you're looking at is maybe less neglected than you thought. And so you have to take this into account somewhat. Maybe in 2015, you could have said, look, we're completely asleep at the wheel. No one's doing anything at all. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, which is good. At the same time, if nothing bad happens, you can't say, well, there was never a risk, because we did do something about it. So it's plausible that if things do work out well, it was because we did see a risk, there was a real risk, and we did something about it. If you remember Y2K and this whole sort of thing, the planes would fall out of the sky because of the date changing on January 1st, 2000. It didn't happen, but precisely because people took it seriously and the programmers just fixed all the things that would have made bad stuff happen then. And then there's general consensus as well that the risk of accidental release from existing just typical biological research we do on viruses is still more likely than intentional release. So even from people who are concerned about this sort of thing, many of them say that the thing that they put, it's hard to put a number on it, but roughly an order of magnitude higher in terms of risk compared to bioterrorism is just the research we do that's very risky in scientific labs today, and has already caused some number of pandemics. Certainly a few, and maybe some more we're not certain about yet. Okay, so there's a lot of uncertainty here, and so here's sort of like a sketch of the questions that we want to have answered to have a better idea of exactly how risky AI makes the biological world. So we don't know how relevant these question-answer benchmark results are. So we know they're real in the sense that they're testing some real understanding of biology within the models, but we don't know if that corresponds to someone actually being able to go through the whole process. How important is this sort of tacit knowledge? When we say tacit knowledge, we mean things that are sort of hard to verbalize. So, for example, learning to drive a car. I mean, yeah, there's an instruction book for it, but when you say someone knows how to drive a car, you don't mean that they know a list of facts about cars. You mean that they've actually physically driven the car and felt what it's like to corner and brake and get out of a skid and stuff like that. Are future models going to get this without having some sort of physical feedback loop with the world? So at the moment, they're learning through text and images online. Is this increasing their capabilities? It seems like it is for at least the verbal description of tacit knowledge. But again, the fact that we aren't testing these things with robots and whatever means that at the moment we're not sure. There just hasn't been that much bioterrorism so far. So it would be good to know about like what's gotten in the way of previous efforts. We do know a bit about that. That isn't so much unanswered as the other ones. And then obviously, once we've established what the risk is, how do we know what's a realistic solution or not? I'm sure some amount of regulation or surveillance would get through this, but what are we willing to do? What's politically possible? This is also the type of thing you'd want some sort of international coordination on. There's no use banning it in the US just for someone to be able to do it in Canada or Mexico or something. And some things we've collaborated on well globally. So there were sort of things that we agreed internationally to do or to not do. So the biologists of the world have gotten together and said, look, we're not doing this and that. We have no exact framework, but it has been done before. But that's something we'd want to know as well. So yeah, this is 6 is sort of like 4. How much can just sort of a thing in the computer know without interacting with the physical world? There's disagreement on this. Some people imagine the sort of classic AI as being able to intuit anything just from the information it has. And if it had an IQ of 1,000, it would be able to figure out exactly the viral sequence and whatever. But there's cases against this as well. For example, it might just be that there's some minimum amount of uncertainty that a model would have about something true in science, and there just might be a minimum number of experiments that it would need to do to actually understand. How much can be known without doing a new experiment? Still uncertain, and we don't even exactly have like this question well formed yet either. There's regulation in the books, or so I'm told, that's coming soon, but there's a bunch of regulation that might be sort of unknown or far away, and that will obviously impact how things go. Reliability. So some projects you do might be really sensitive to something going wrong. Some might not be. If you're putting together a drawer and there's like this one screw you like mess up and then the whole rest of the drawer is screwed up, that's a sort of model where it would really matter to be extremely accurate on things. Some other things, if you're just, making a cake from scratch, you can afford to mess up like one step and it's mostly okay. If biological design is more like the cake, that's bad. If it's more like, the messy IKEA design where one mistake messes up the whole thing, then that's probably good news. Unknown unknowns, we don't know what we don't know. And will we get some sort of advance warning of this? Are we likely to see sort of some group try to use AI and fail miserably? And this would impact what regulation we end up getting in the near term. Okay, what are we doing about this? Well, we're like evaluating the current models, basically. The biggest model providers, so Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google DeepMind, all do this voluntarily now as part of their release. So whenever they release a new model, you see there's a model card, and that model card includes results on various benchmarks. These are a few of them. They're typically only done on the models that the creator themselves made. For example, OpenAI tends to just evaluate their own, and so their evaluations aren't useful to compare, let's say, Claude and GPT-5. And again, we have uncertainties about how good these evaluations even are. Okay, so these are just some example results from one of Claude's latest, or Anthropic's latest releases for Claude. So if you see here, these are sort of hard to interpret, but they essentially evaluate each model they release. They compare it to the previous ones and see how much risk has been elevated. So this is sort of like a task that tries to capture like multiple steps of virology. It's unsure what we're unsure what the scale actually means here exactly. These are general sort of bioweapons knowledge questions. This is more like trivia. It's not so important. And here they define their threshold. It's elsewhere in the paper, but there was one person who they evaluated who even without the model was scoring like 90%. So he was like somehow, or he, she, we don't know. They were somehow like really good at acquiring bioweapons even without Claude, which is a bit. Let's check on that guy, but yeah. Okay, here's some of OpenAI's evaluations. Again, the bar shouldn't mean anything. Each one of those might not mean anything to you. Each one of these is just a different model, and they compare them. So one of these, I can't remember. Yeah, so this is just a general sort of virology understanding benchmark. And as you see, some models are like slightly better on it than others. It's not so interesting. The human baseline here is about 40% though. So they're all outperforming sort of like a basic human at this. And the PhD level is a bit higher, and I think it's meeting it. Here's another benchmark that they developed together with a nonprofit which does this sort of research. And this benchmark, interestingly, was actually something that tried to measure the level of tacit knowledge they have. So it's like quizzing them as if they were sort of wanting to know about, real world knowledge. Again, it's by text. There's no robot hooked up to this or anything, so we're not sure exactly how much this corresponds to real tacit knowledge. But they're getting somewhere. So it seems to be the current state of things is like, given what we can test them with, and given what they're capable of, which is mostly just textual in and out understanding and images and stuff like that, they know some things. And that's all we can really say confidently. Here's a list of like biosecurity relevant benchmarks, and you can see like this is the year. So this is like in 2023, this is how good they are, or this is how good the best model was at this time. So the best models, as you can see, are saturating these benchmarks. Around here is human level performance, and so in the span of roughly 2 years, they've mostly eked out all the gains that they'll realistically get in terms of performance on these benchmarks. Okay, so what else might we do about this? Well, the model providers do other things. So there's various things we do to align models and make them helpful and harmless in general. And some of these would apply to biorisks as well. So we try to make them say no, right? If you say, make me super virus, they say no. We might deliberately try to remove sensitive knowledge from them if there's something that we can't possibly fathom would be good for the model to have. Open source models have their own risks because whatever you do to them, someone can sort of fine-tune away some of the mitigations there and stuff like that. But there are methods that are a bit more robust to this. And so open source models are not necessarily doomed, but they also are a sort of unique threat space because unlike models that the model providers host themselves and can sort of control, you can do whatever you want with the open source model on your computer. This is sort of what I was thinking of when I was asking about how realistic or what's realistic in terms of mitigations, because it seems to be that open source models in terms of capability lag the frontier by like a fairly consistent fixed number of times. So they're like some number of months behind the frontier at all times. And so the best sort of proprietary closed source paid models we have now, there will be something open source realistically in the next couple of years that matches their capability. So how much the model providers can do by controlling their own systems might be limited if open source ones are different. Though again, they can have their own set of mitigations. One thing that the biological models, some of the best ones try to do, is filter the training data. So they aren't really that able to generalize far away from what they've seen. And so unsurprisingly, training them on fewer viral sequences and bacteria sequences and stuff like that makes them not as good at predicting things about viral sequences in the future. And then some of them have been hosted. Some of them are restricted access, just like ChatGPT and Claude and whatever. So for example, one of Google's, well, this was temporary, but some of the big biological models are only hosted by the model providers, and you can't have them on your own computer and do whatever. Again, how long that continues and how realistic we think that is like a separate question. And you might reasonably say that the harms on scientific progress and whatever from restricting these things is not worth the risk mitigation. Okay, what more can we do? Oh wait, did I miss? Okay. Okay. Okay, these are sort of things we are also currently doing, but less than we should be. So there are some things which just reduce risks of biological harms in general, and these might be like good to do because they don't require, well, for a few reasons. One is that most of our pandemics so far, or all of them, well, depends, have not been really intentional. All of our significant pandemics have been in some way an accident, either from animal exposure or something else, we're not sure, but we need to defend against those as well. And some of these defenses are broad and don't just apply to, defending against an attack. So these are sort of like, if you keep up to date with the latest biosecurity stuff, this is like the hot new technologies. Some of them are old stuff, but early detection and warning, we can screen wastewater for early signs of viruses spreading. We use this now to surveil like the levels of virus. So you can, if you look up like Ontario's wastewater tracker, you can see how much flu and COVID and RSV there is floating around. We can surveil the air. This is like a newer thing, but this would allow us early detection. Now, this is something we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be stockpiling personal protective equipment. We don't do this enough, and so every time there's a pandemic, the price that the government buys to replenish their stockpile is like much higher than what it would have been if they stockpiled in advance. So this happened at the beginning of COVID. They were paying like multiple dollars per N95 because the stockpiles were just not sufficient to actually hold anyone over for long enough. Although we do have stockpiles, they're basically just not good enough. There are other things that reduce transmission in general. So you can filter the indoor air. We do this a bit more post-COVID, but obviously not enough. I'm not sure how filtered this air is, for example. Ventilating buildings in general. There are other reasons you might want to do this. Some people just feel better with more ventilated buildings, but also ventilation is a key part of reducing the pathogen load and is one of the reasons we're more susceptible to stuff nowadays, right? We did not, in the old days, there was no, cramped buildings we lived in. And then things like far UVC can be used to hopefully safely disinfect the air, and it's like another way to have quick air filtration. There are things we can do to get immunization out faster to people. We can have challenge trials. A bunch of people, for example, in COVID, signed up to be volunteers for challenge trials for the vaccines. We didn't end up using them. People are a challenge trial, by the way, is basically they give in this context is they give you the vaccine and then they intentionally give you the virus and see how well it worked. Without this, you basically need to just go let people be free and see how much virus they get, and this takes forever. Something we did sort of well in COVID, though, is we accelerated and improved things more quickly. Maybe not as quickly as we could have, but given how long it typically takes to develop a drug or vaccine, we were fairly quick, and we can be even quicker at this. Some vaccine platforms, like the newer mRNA, have benefits and drawbacks. One of the benefits, though, is that they can be more quickly tuned to different variants. So as things evolve, you can more quickly have a new vaccine with the mRNA stuff than you could with some of the older types of vaccines. Now, biosecurity is sort of the other word for the stuff we're worried about from deliberately offensive things. Safety is more general. So these specific security things, one thing that's important. So as part of making a virus, you would need to synthesize the DNA for it. And the companies that make these synthesis machines currently have algorithms and a bunch of things that basically prevent you from synthesizing something which looks like a virus. This is like mostly voluntary. There are like some incentives for them to do this, but there's no strict regulation in any country at the moment. This will hopefully soon change. That requires them to do this. And so if these people happen to be less moral and scrupulous and whatever, they could just allow you to print whatever, and this would be bad. So this is basically one of the bottlenecks that's stopping you right now from just going and printing, sort of 3D printing the DNA for Ebola or whatever. Surveillance and regulation are always basically going to be the two other levers we can pull. What these look like exactly and what we're sort of willing to bear is currently unknown. But even people who work in the fields, will often say, yeah, look, I wouldn't mind being, surveilled a little more because of the danger of, researching things. So surveillance of how people, what people acquire. We do have some of this right now. So you can't anonymously order, the instructions for, or like the material to make most things. Although even this is not as surveilled as you'd expect, given how heavily we surveil other things. Okay, this is a fun idea. So some technologies like AI, which we're discussing, sort of can bend both ways to harm or benefit. But we do choose what we develop to some extent. You can't choose what other people develop, but you can sort of maybe encourage things to go in a certain direction. And some technologies are naturally bent towards defense in this sense. And these are things that you can either fund more governmentally, have incentives, through some policy or some other way. We have ways to move levers on what even private companies do. Whatever you tax happens less. Whatever you subsidize happens more. There are a bunch of neat policy levers that we can use to basically make it easier for people to develop specifically defensive technologies. So better respirators or personal protective equipment. All those technologies we talked about in the earlier thing. We can provide incentives for private companies to stockpile more personal protective equipment. Stuff like that. This was Vitalik Buterin, the Ethereum guy's idea. Now, his specific version of this is much more specific than I can get into here. But this sort of acceleration of specific technologies can be sort of a way we balance out the acceleration of the stuff that might be dual use without necessarily slowing it down, because there are obviously reasons people want AI development to be faster, specifically in biology, which I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I mean, why is biology a domain of AI at all? Well, much of the benefits people want are from biological things. You want better medical treatment, better, both better medical decisions, but also just better technologies. You want better vaccines, drugs, etc. And so there are real costs to slowing things down. And this is a way we can just speed up technologies. Is it enough? I don't know, but it's one avenue. Okay. One last note. In terms of communicating these risks to people, this is more of like my takes. The previous stuff is sort of less controversial, but I think it's important to correctly convey what we are not certain about. And when I say we, I mean like people who know about these risks, know or think or work in domains here and stuff like that. There's this sort of common scientific habit we have of alarmism, basically, which is like bad for a bunch of reasons. This is like a whole other discussion we could get into. But there are many cases before when we communicated things with much more certainty than we had, even for good reason. The people doing this have the best intentions, but it almost always backfires. So I'll give brief examples. These are, again, controversial. We can talk about them after if you'd like. But for example, we've had uncertainty about, in the early days of COVID, we weren't sure about a lot of things, and many sort of government agencies and whatever jumped to things that they thought they were sure about, but really weren't. And this created a lot of like distrust and stuff like that. So as you know, we went back and forth on masks. The WHO didn't recognize that COVID was spreadable by aerosols for a long time. It reflexively said, no, it's only droplets, and didn't change that until far after, when it was too late. People really didn't like this. I mean, this was really unpopular, and that probably handicapped a lot of public health messaging later on when we needed it. And to this day, it's affected, people's trust in science as well. Other things as well. I mean, there are things that we learn about all the time and we are uncertain about. Climate science is an example. So, 20 years ago, we weren't sure about what the equilibrium climate sensitivity was. And we've learned more, and we've sort of crossed off the most pessimistic and the most optimistic sort of estimates. But if many people's impression was that, well, we only heard the pessimistic side earlier and we never got the update. And many people would have preferred to hear that, well, we're not really sure about a lot of these things. And this turned out to be negative for both of those things, which were, of course, well-meaning sort of public initiatives for people to understand important things like climate science and pandemics. It's sort of silly that people like to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not good that someone would say, look, they got it wrong on the TV once, therefore I'm going to do everything, everything like the opposite of what they told me to, but we know that people will do this. And so you don't want to be the boy crying wolf too early. And there's some balance to strike with, how much you try to shake people awake and what you say that might bite you later when something naturally, given how uncertain we are, turns out to be different than what you thought it was. At the same time, you want to speak clearly about what you know about the risks. And I mean, this is sort of obvious, but like you have to tell people about what you know as you know it. And that means not hiding uncertainty, but also not saying a less intense version of what you really think. Public opinion can move a lot. So right now, there's been sort of like, at least the popular press is sort of not in a happy state with some of the recent AI progress. And you might get complacent and think that this will always sort of stay forever, right? Like risks have become a much more acceptable thing to talk about, but everything ebbs and flows, and there will be periods when this is even easier to talk about. So there might be times you need to jump on it and really message, strike while the iron is hot, while people are already especially worried. And there also might be sometimes when AI is in, sort of the better on everyone's good list because of, some, let's say, some development and treatment of some disease comes out. And you might need to change the messaging when people have, let's say, temporarily or permanently a more positive view of AI and biology in general. Work with people who disagree. So you don't want to alienate people who aren't perfectly aligned with your cause. So this happens a lot in AI. The people more concerned with near-term harms often say, oh man, those people with the long-term harm worries, they're distracting from my thing. And to a lesser extent, but also the other way, vice versa. This is not good. You cannot be fighting and infighting with people who are broadly aligned with you. And luckily with bio stuff right now, we have this alignment where people are largely aware of the risks. The companies developing the models acknowledge that the risks are real. The scientists sort of say the risks are real. The policy people mostly say the risks are real. We will all have differences of opinion on like random niche aspects of this issue, but it would be a real tragedy if that like handicaps the whole effort to talk about bio and AI risks. So broadly, if someone's generally on your side, as in they want the influence of AI on our health and everything to be positive, they're probably on your team, and you should be pretty careful about disagreeing too harshly with them in public about the less important matters of the whole thing. Okay, random sources. Okay, the slideshow will be available after. These are like good readings. I think the most accessible things, I haven't actually listened to these episodes, but I listened to this podcast in general, and they're very long episodes, but these are 3 episodes that talk about sort of this domain of AI and biorisk and bioterrorism and threats like that in general, and they're generally very good. This guy's like a well-known expert in these things, and so is she and them as well. This piece, again, it's linked in the slideshow, was written by my friend who's usually at this meetup. He's not. This one is, which talks about sort of the uncertainties we have with biomodels and their evaluations. And this is a sort of somewhat skeptical, but also just expressing uncertainty paper by a well-known research institute, including people who work at Cohere nearby, our sort of Canadian AI pride, about exactly what we know and don't know about the current state of AI and biorisk. So these are like sort of, this is an easy reading, this is a longish paper, and these are podcasts you can listen to in the car or the bus or whatever. Anyways, thank you. So we have like, as long as you guys would like for questions and discussion, it's like 7:18. So yeah, anyone? Change is kind of like the one that people go to if you ever rally, or we struggle to rally people viewing that. Do you see any parallels between kind of the issue that climate change poses and what is required in order to mitigate biorisks that are posed by AI? Yeah, that's actually a great analogy, and I liked it earlier, and I used it earlier with the communication issue. So yeah, I guess 2 similarities are that they're sort of hard to undo, and so there's only so much you can know in advance. So on the one hand, with climate, I mean, we are to some extent waiting to see what happens. I mean, we're doing some things. We're just not sure about a lot of it, and it's hard to undo things. So we do have to live to some extent with the decisions we make now, whether we overreact or underreact and miss the boat. And I'd say the policy, like the weighing the different policy things, is another thing. So there are on both sides legitimate reasons you might want to go harder or less hard on what we do about these things. So in the case of climate change, I mean, we need cheap, abundant energy, especially countries that aren't as rich as us. And that energy might be fossil fuels. I mean, there's a lot pushing on each side. Climate regulation, at least at the moment, is quite unpopular. There's a lot of things like that. With the biology side, I mean, if you think of it as just like an acceleration, deceleration thing, well, again, there's a lot of good stuff we want to come out of AI and bio. And so, just stopping the whole field would be a tragedy in another sense. So I'd say that's the main thing. There's like competing interests that are legitimate on both sides. That makes communication about it harder, and what to actually do about it not obvious. Anyone else? Giles? The question is, are there any technologies which are good in both directions? This isn't good for the helpful bio and not good for the not helpful bio. Nothing off the top of my head, and maybe sort of the broader challenge is that these aren't so cleanly separable. So in the field of virology, I mean, I would like virologists, at least the type of work they do that I don't think is dangerous, I would want them to be better at this. And it would be hard to sort of make technology that is like general capabilities are, I think, here inherently dual use. And that's a challenge. So at the moment, no, I think that's part of the issue is that there aren't so many things that are purely on one, that are positive on one, negative on the other. There are domains of AI and bio which might be overall probably neutral on risk. So if, for example, you were to just have very targeted, models targeted to specifically human biology that don't really learn much about the dangerous, sort of other life forms, maybe that would be much better for human health than it is bad for biorisk. But it would be hard to think of something right now that's helps biorisk in that sense. Uh, yeah, in terms of, yeah, I think Google would give a better answer than me. In terms of keeping track, there are things the government keeps track of, but there's no, as far as I know, sort of centralized repository of. Well, it depends what you mean exactly. If you mean sort of companies or people employing it, I don't know. If you mean of all biological AI models in general, there are some things like that. Epoch AI Research keeps a database. You can look them up. I've done work for them, conflict of interest. Keeps a database of AI models, and some of them are biological. And yeah, apart from that, I'm not aware of any other central registry. There's certainly nothing that you have to, there's nothing you have to mandatorily sort of submit to when you're training an AI model or something like that. Yeah, much less than you'd expect. So, of all of the models developed, very few of them have any sort of specific mitigations. I didn't go into detail there on all of sort of the technical side of what they do because, I mean, it's sort of just not so interesting. There are things other than that, though. Typically, you would see, if you want to learn more about them, when a big deal biological model comes out, usually in the paper, the best ones have been fairly detailed with the safety mitigations they use. But it varies per model. And those were like the only filtering the training data, refusals, and access restrictions are the most commonly used ones. Everything else would be something adopted by just a small number of all of them. I think so, in the sense that of the of all of like the lab space, let's say that's dedicated to biology, most of it is in the hands of like legitimate people and institutions which are there for good reasons. One of the problems with biology is, though, is that it doesn't so much matter if you don't do it if someone else does do it. Well, it does matter, but the goal is to have no one ever create the next super weapon. And you could make a list of all the universities, let's say, who have labs who won't do this. But the question is more, well, will this ever happen? And then it does matter what sort of a random actor is doing. Now, those legitimate labs can sort of accelerate defensive technology, and that's one of the things we were talking about earlier. So, if, for example, we used the good guys to accelerate production of or development of vaccines and stuff like that, that would be an example of something tilting the balance one way. But the mere existence of good guys in the lab doesn't inherently reduce the odds that Joe Schmo in 30 years with a really smart AI model will be able to set up something. Um,
Right now you can already just order from labs sequences, but the thing is that you can also cut up sequences. So you can order something like, let's say, 20 innocuous sequences and chop them up and increase them. So I'd say like the risk has already been there for AI, but who knows? But
yeah, that too. Did I miss anyone? All right. Oh yeah.
One thing that I wanted to ask you is, do you think the biorisks that are currently associated with the pre-trained models and then fine-tuning a specific task is still very minimal? Um, and this is based on the fact that biology is so complex. There are different modalities that you need to look at to make prediction. So what I wanted to just understand is there are a lot of biorisks that you have spoken about with this, specifically talking about looking at a model that is not necessarily pre-trained, but developing something from scratch, and then there is a biorisk associated with, or actually there is a pre-trained model and then you fine-tune on a specific task. Because for the latter, I think that the risks are still very, very minimal. Just asking.
Yeah. Is So are you asking me to compare sort of the risk of the pre-trained models and the specific task fine-tuned models?
So pre-trained model that's fine-tuned on a specific task. I feel like the biorisk associated with that is still very minimal, just because it's biology. It's not like another domain where you can actually still do a lot of damaging things. So what I wanted to understand is that if you train a model from scratch, let's say if you're a big pharmaceutical company that has a lot of resources and can build something from scratch and then do something damaging, I feel like there is more harm in that front than using something that is publicly available as a pre-trained model and fine-tuning your specific task.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes, I would say that actually many of the domains of like types of models that are very specific, yeah, probably carry less harms. I would agree. Because there's only so much generalization you would get from learning one specific task very well. So yeah, I don't expect, for example, like there to be much risk from some university training on like their very specific, data set of like uh, plasmids that live in some river water or something. Like there's just not much you're going to like. It'll be good at helping you with your river water plasmids, but it just won't be good at that much else. And yeah, those are probably less harmful. Although the research, like the cost of developing the big models, would also be greater, so there would be fewer of them running about because small fine-tuned models maybe university lab can do the giant pre-training ones, or giant pre-trained models. They would be more harmful. There's also just fewer of them because it takes more money to develop. So that pushes the other way. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
MIT has come out with the announcement that they've developed with an AI molecules and drugs that they think could fight superbugs. And my question is simply, do you think news like that should be announced, like an AI did this, or should we kind of be pulling back and kind of have a publication ban on those things until we have tested them much more?
Just I hadn't seen the headline. So it was a development AI found something that's like positive, right? That could. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. One good thing to mention. Yeah, glad you brought it up. That's another thing that can be accelerated. So drug development as well, apart from just vaccines, are used as therapeutics. And we, regardless of AI, we do have an antibiotic resistance bacteria sort of problem that we somehow need to get ahead of. I'm not sure what the status is there, but AI would probably help more than it harms. In terms of what we talk about specifically, I could see that being dual use. So it could be that, for example, knowing about the next generation therapeutics or whatever could help. It depends what your specific worry is. Is your worry that bad, this is not good in the wrong hands, or are you worried that people will take these drugs in advance too much or something?
Something like that, and sort of wave the flag, we did it. Number one, people are going to expect that those things will be immediately available, and they may not be sufficiently tested for that. We may not have a manufacturing venue for it yet. And the other thing is that maybe people are looking for things like that, bad actors are looking for things like that so that they can go and steal the information. And also the AI model. So we have discussions like this just in plain cybersecurity, where we wonder how much we should disclose. And it's that question: should we be banning disclosure for like 6 months? And the drug companies would hate that because then they wouldn't make as much money. But there might be good reason to hold that information back. And I'm just wondering what you thought.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure how this shakes out in terms of plus like harms and benefits of publication. But I could see that there could be a public safety interest in delaying when we disclose things in this field in general. I mean, it is just the type of thing where the whole problem here is, knowledge access. And yeah, it could be, I haven't thought about the drug case, but it could be that there's some public interest in waiting at least or something. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? If not, I'll let you guys. You're free to hang out here for a while. So if you guys want to just chat with each other, get your $5 worth, and a TTC fare is worth